Well, it's all about politics, news, debate and opinion from the heart of Westminster. Boris Johnson's decision to prorogue Parliament has faced fierce criticism in some quarters. It's been dubbed a coup and a constitutional outrage. But is it? Particularly given the allegations of constitutional outrage on the other side against the Speaker and the so-called Rebel Alliance. Well, joining me to discuss that are Jack Simpson-Caird, the former constitutional law specialist in the House of Commons Library, and Meg Russell, Director of the Constitution Unit at University College London. Welcome to you both. I mean, we've got claims of constitutional outrage on both sides. Can you adjudicate who is being outrageous? Is it having this idea of taking over the order paper, or is it proroguing Parliament?
Well,
or neither.
We tend to use more tempered language than outrage, but I'm at the top of a letter to the Times today, signed by 22 constitutional experts, saying that this prorogation is constitutionally improper. It breaches various traditions. Centrally, the government is responsible to Parliament, accountable to Parliament. It's shutting down parliamentary accountability for 5 weeks in the middle of a major political crisis, as we can hear. But also, the prorogation itself is completely out of step with past practice. It's the longest prorogation for 90 years. And although it may not be illegal, Jack is a lawyer, he knows more about that than me, it certainly is against constitutional norms. And the nature of our constitution is that it depends on the people in power respecting the norms, and those norms have not been respected.
Jack, what do you say to that?
Well, I'd say that making legislative proposals, as the MPs responsible for the anti-no deal legislation are going to do, is an entirely normal thing in our constitutional system.
So that's not an outrage?
I don't think that is an outrage. It's entirely normal for MPs to try to change the law.
For the Speaker to allow it?
That's for them. That's their job, is to make proposals to change the law. I think what's abnormal is for the government of the day to escalate a confrontation with MPs that they might not win, and I think that's something that's very abnormal.
What do you mean specifically there?
Well, I mean that creating a constitutional confrontation has long-term constitutional consequences and short-term constitutional consequences. The legislative process is not a one-shot game, and normally the government of the day respects the basic constitutional norms that govern our system.
Now, what about this prorogation question? We have prorogations fairly regularly. MPs, after all, have just been away on 6 weeks holiday. So is it wrong to have a prorogation of 5 weeks in the run-up to Brexit?
I think what's different, what we should say about this prorogation is it's designed to escalate the confrontation, and at a time when our constitution is trying to encourage compromise. That's what our constitutional system is designed to do, encourage a compromise between the branches of the state. Escalating that confrontation is not a good idea.
I think it's very important to make the distinction between prorogation, which normally lasts for a few days and is completely in the hands of the government to decide, and breaking up for a recess, what we call adjournment, which is in the hands of MPs. So some ministers are saying this is normal because they were going to break up for the conference recess, but actually MPs got a choice on whether to do that or not. And there was a sign that MPs were going to block it because they wanted to sit through September and October to scrutinise the government's Brexit plans.
But aren't we at a point where obviously the government doesn't have a majority, and therefore, but we got the Fixed Term Parliament Act, which means that sort of dissolving Parliament and trying to get a majority is a difficult option. So both sides it's gamesmanship, isn't it? They're using the rules to try and prevail. I mean, and in a sense, you could argue that that's the system working.
I think the fact that we are in a minority government situation is absolutely key to this. I mean, there are a number of things which are very unusual. Clearly, the Brexit situation, the referendum, etc., these are unusual circumstances. But what we're seeing is our parliamentary system tested at a time of minority government, when what we're used to is majority government. And that's why the things that Jack is saying are important, because MPs, yes, it's perfectly proper for MPs to choose to legislate, but usually the government has a majority in Parliament and you're not going to get hostile legislation. MPs are using the tools that they have at their disposal, and it seems like the system just isn't adjusting very well to minority government. That's where a lot of this aggravation is coming from.
But it also is a problem that the referee in this, to a certain extent the Speaker, is seen as partisan.
Well, I think the Speaker tries to do things that he thinks would be supported by a majority of MPs. That's his role. His role is to to speak for Parliament. And if he thinks a majority of MPs want to do something, then I think he's legitimate in trying to sort of find a way of doing that.
Okay, now, the possible scenario of the next few days is Parliament does indeed assert itself and take control of the agenda. The government is saying in that case they will try to use the Fixed Term Parliament Act to seek an election. How's all that going to play out?
This is really interesting because the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, which came in 2011, has been seen as yet to not have very many teeth because obviously Theresa May called an early general election in 2017 and Parliament voted for it. But in order to call an election now under that act, the Prime Minister has to have 2/3 of all MPs voting in favour of that election. What he seems to be looking to do here is to use the calling of an election to block this bill. And in those circumstances, the MPs who want the bill, who appear to be a majority, would be very foolish to support him in that move. So it may be that he tries to get an election and it's actually refused to him by Parliament, and we would see the strength of the Fixed Term Parliaments Act really for the first time.
That legislation if others are controlling the legislative agenda?
That's a good question.
I think he probably could. I think the thing that's interesting about the way the Fixed Term Parliaments Act works is that he can't set the date via the motion. So MPs, if they agreed the motion under the Fixed Term Parliament Act, wouldn't necessarily have a guarantee that the date would be on the date that the government said it would be.
The election date.
The election date, sorry.
Now, could he stretch the election until after Brexit Day?
Well, if MPs give him support in principle to have a general election, he then goes away and decides on what date that general election will be held.
But it could be a long pause. I mean, that's legal. I thought there was a sort of
25 days.
25 days or something.
Well, we have a prorogation coming, so he could decide there was going to be a prorogation ahead of the election. He can choose what election date he likes, and he could potentially put that after Brexit. So MPs would be both losing their bill and they would be putting their trust in Boris Johnson to keep his word on the election date. And I'm not sure a lot of them will want to do that.
Okay, I think we're going to be back consulting you for days to come. Thank you both very much indeed. Well, we'll have the latest coverage as MPs come back to Westminster and prepare to do battle with the Prime Minister over a no-deal Brexit here on Sky News. All the reaction and analysis and, of course, live the crucial debates throughout today.